Brilliant. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining this commodity masterclass. I'm thrilled that the team from Ferrero is hosting this session, which is in a series of commodity decarbonization sessions that we've been hosting now over the last couple of months. And I'm really excited to deep dive into the world of hazelnuts and really understand how you can drive decarbonization efforts and understand as well some of the solutions and case studies that the Ferrero team have unlocked. So as I said, this is part of a series under our climate transition coalition of action. Whether you're here with us today live or you're listening to this recording in the future, you can see this along a whole series of events on the website of the Consumer Goods Forum, where there's a huge amount of knowledge and best practice sharing that's happened over the last year. So what you're going to hear today, today's agenda, again, if you're here with us today live, we'll have the opportunity for some questions and answers. If you're listening to this in the future, don't hesitate to reach out to me. My contact details will be on our website, and we will absolutely get back to you. So I'm in very good company, as I've been in all of these master classes with Mario and Stefano. So Mario leads sustainability at the Ferrero Group, and Stefano heads raw material and responsible sourcing for Ferrero. So you really are in the company of experts who I know are very eager to share opportunities and call for collaboration with those of you. So if we look on the next slide, I'll just give you a quick overview before I hand it over to Mario of what you're going to hear about on today's session. So we will first give you a context on hazelnuts and the context of the commodity. We look as well about each commodity that we've looked at. There's obviously been different regional specificities, and hazelnuts are no different. So we'll give you kind of an overview of what that looks like across the globe. The feedback that we've gotten in all of these sessions is there's real interest, obviously, in the solutions and deep diving into what's worked and maybe some of the unlocks that the Ferrero team have had to work on, and really concrete case studies on how this is actually happening on the ground. Again, if you're here with us live, we have our Q&A session, and we're looking at obviously after the summer break, we'll be back with more details on what's coming next in the series. And of course, all of these ideas and case studies, we'd love to see how we could scale them beyond sharing knowledge today. So if you are interested in more details and you want to find out more, again, please do reach out to me. So with that, I'll hand it over to Mario to give you a context on the Ferrero Group, and we'll get into today's session. So thank you, and Mario, over to you.
Thank you very much, Sharon. That's a great opportunity here for us to be in this masterclass. I have, of course, seen all of them so far, so really happy that we have the opportunity as well to share with you. And we're going to be sharing with you about hazelnuts, because hazelnuts are very keen to Ferrero. Our products are usually very famous for the hazelnut taste and aroma that many of our products have. Just to give an introduction, I don't want to steal the show from hazelnuts, but just to give an introduction to everyone who may be not so familiar with Ferrero. Some of our brands, I believe you would recognize, like Kinder, Nutella, Ferrero Rocher, Tic Tac, but we have 39 brands that we are selling basically all over the world in more than 170 countries. We are reaching 50,000 employees very soon with a turnover above 18.4 billion euros. So definitely a very global company dedicated entirely to confectionery. We have a sustainability framework of which myself and my team were responsible for, where you would find 4 key pillars that you see in the center here: protecting the environment, sourcing ingredients sustainably, promoting responsible consumption, and empowering people. And they circle our purpose, vision, and mission, which are in the core of this framework. But nothing can happen without the elements you see on the outer ring, from engagement to communication, ethics, compliance, science, and innovation and collaboration. What we do here in regard to sustainability is we secure that sustainability is integrated in what we call the long-term guideline or the strategic direction for the business. So sustainability is part of it. I'll just keep this on. Sustainability is part of it, the long strategic priority areas. And here you see the, I would say, the 8 priority areas that we have in sustainability these days embedded in the company strategy, starting from climate action, followed by agriculture and biodiversity, supply chain transparency, water, human rights, which is mostly across the supply chain, our people, packaging and plastics, and nutrition. So today the focus is going to be on the agriculture and biodiversity, and also in regard to supply chain. So with me, as Sharon said, I have Stefano Severi, who is the real star here behind the Hazelnut program for Ferrero. And with that, I'll hand over to Stefano. We tried to have this meeting room working, but we couldn't in the beginning, so we're running from a laptop. And so I'll not only pass the word to Stefano, but I'll pass the laptop to Stefano.
Thank you very much, Mario, and thank you very much, Sharon, for the invitation. So before starting to discuss a little bit deeper into the Hazelnut world, I would like to share with you 2 slides only to setting a little bit the scene. And the first one is about our greenhouse gas emissions, where you can see quite clearly that the biggest part is, like all our peers, I would say, linked to scope 3. So more or less, more than 90% of our greenhouse gas emissions are coming from scope 3. And if I look a little bit more into the detail, 2/3 are coming from the raw material supply chain. So this is not a surprise. Then later on, you will discover a little bit more, which is the impact and how we manage the impact of the hazelnut value chain. And I think a second important point is, as you can imagine, hazelnuts, as Mario mentioned at the early stage of the presentation, are a key ingredients of our products. That's the reason why in 2015, we developed a standing alone company managing the hazelnut value chain for Ferrero from the farm to the factory, integrating all the different functions of the Ferrero group handling hazelnuts. And it has been the result. So it's the Ferrero Hazelnut Company, where we have different departments. We have the agribusiness development department, who is taking care of planting and harvesting technique, plus all the development of new techniques as well. We have a dedicated procurement that is sourcing from different regions around the world. Industrial and supply chain, who are already integrated in this company, all the outbound logistic, and the B2B sales. We have 10 years of history, and our footprint is the following. So we have 10 agri-farms around the world, from Georgia to the southern hemisphere of America. We have 10 sourcing countries all around the world. And we have 7 processing plants between Turkey, Italy, and South America. So now on, we go to the hazelnut context, and I would like to share with you a little bit the complexity of the hazelnut world. First of all, it's not a big commodity when we think about the production. We are talking about, depending on the crop season, around 1.2, 1.3 metric million of tons of production. And when we talk about million of tons of production, we talk about hazelnut with the shell. So always more or less divided by 2 to have the edible part. And the hazelnut value chain overall is around $3.5 billion. So these are the data available for 24-25. So you can expect more or less that each year we are around this data. What is also very important that it's a supply chain with some key actors. As you can imagine, the main actor in terms of productivity is Turkey, with roughly 800,000 tons always in the shell, followed by US, followed then by Italy, Azerbaijan, Chile, China, Georgia, Iran, and Spain. And if you take the main 3 producing countries, so Turkey, US, and Italy, you get more than 75% of this crop coming from these 3 countries. So again, a quite important conversion to few countries. Another important point that you need to underline is that the value chain of hazelnut is heavily fragmented. What does it mean? We have more or less a little bit more than 1 million hectares of orchard worldwide and around 600,000 farmers worldwide. It means that we deal in hazelnut independently from the country, with a couple of exceptions, with smallholders. So something that is comparable, for example, with cocoa. So the big part of the farmers growing hazelnut are smallholders. And when we talk about smallholders, we talk about people managing below 5 hectares. Again, if you look the concentration of acreage in the different countries, and we take the most important 5 countries, so Turkey, Italy, Georgia, and US, what is coming out? That 90% of the cultivated area are concentrated in 5 producing countries. So more or less something that is similar to what has been shared a couple of meetings ago on cocoa. So a very big concentration and handled by smallholders. An important other point is that more or less 80% of the hazelnut we are producing around the world are exported. So the producing countries are exporting the biggest part, and the biggest continent in terms of demand is Europe. So Europe is absorbing the biggest part of the hazelnut production coming from around the world. So you can imagine there is also an important impact on the logistic part. Why this? Because the main countries in terms of productivity is Turkey. We mentioned it before, roughly 800,000 tons. And the biggest market for Turkish hazelnut, in this case, they are the edible part, so the shelled part, is Europe. So again, in many cases, Italy and Turkey are very good examples. We have countries that are producing for self-consumption. More or less 20% of the hazelnut are remaining in the country where they are produced. In the case of Turkey, in the case of Italy, the rest is is exported in different countries like Europe, like, for example, from US, the main market is China for domestic consumption. Now, what we would like to focus today, we would like to understand a little bit better where are the sources and the sinks of the hazelnut farms. So we try to focus on our chart, and then I will share with you 2 different points of view. The grand angle, when you see the hazelnut value chain overall, so from the farm to the factory gate, because there are a lot of processes in between, and when you take a zoom and you go really to the harvesting in the orchard. In this case, when we take an orchard, we have, I would say, 4 main reasons of emissions, and I would say 2 main reasons of sinks. So for sure, one of the main reasons is fuel consumption on farm and electricity. Why this? Because farmers are using tractors in some countries, but farmers are also taking off 2 important parts. When you take the hazelnut out of the tree, you need to collect them, you need to clean them, and to dry them. For this, you need energy. Second point is urea fertilization and liming. Again, you have trees, you have orchards, and you need to put inputs into the orchard. Third point is, again, NU2 as fertilizer application, which is quite common to many other commodities. And last but not least, it's quite often impacted by the field burning of the residues. So you can imagine you have different trees, you need to clean them, and very often in many reasons and in many different regions, you have burning of these residues. Then you have 2 main sources of carbon undertaking. The first one is when you have the debris who are into compost, and the second one is the carbon stock in the soil and the cover crop. Again, it's a quite complex model, and this is only the focus on the orchard. Never forget that the focus is on the orchard, and then we will see there is an in-between where there is other processes to bring the clean shelled hazelnut in something that is edible. So if we look into the contribution of the integrated value chain, so what I mentioned you before, the complete value chain of hazelnut, so from the orchard to the factory ready to be used, more or less the impact is 2.7 kgs of CO2 equivalent per kg of edible hazelnut, so deshelled. And we have three main drivers. As you can imagine, we have transportation, because as I mentioned before, 80% or even a little bit more of the hazelnut are produced in one country to be exported to another country. So the domestic consumption is around 20%. Then you have the industrial part. In the industrial part, you have cracking, so to bring the hazelnut that has been dried and cleaned to put it in a edible and not edible part, so to put away the shell. The sorting, so calibration and all the selection to bring it to the quality grade that you need. And the processing, if you are dealing with processed hazelnut, can be roasted, can be paste, can be chopped hazelnut. And then last but not least, you have farming. So farming is what I showed you before. And for farming, we have done a deep dive with the following. So the pure farming contribution is much lower. We are talking about 0.3 kgs of CO2 equivalent per kgs of product. And in this case, we have 5 main drivers. So as I mentioned you before, we have fertilizer. Even if hazelnut value chain is not heavy demanding in terms of fertilization. We have electricity, again, for the cleaning and the drying facilities. We have emission of NO2 from fertilizer, field burning residues, other waste management like biomass degradation and pesticides, plus fuel, who again is the one used for cleaning, for drying, and for tractors. So you see that it's becoming quite a complex value chain. So some regional specificities. Again, we started in saying that big part of hazelnut are coming from one country, with Turkey, but we have different kind of orchards around the world. And normally what we do, we classify it in 3 main clusters. So we have the small farms, the medium farms, and the large farms. And it's quite immediate to understand that is also depending from the geographical morphology of where the farms are managed. Why this? Because when you have flat land, it's easy to have large farms. When you have small hills, it's more easy to have medium farms. And when you are going to hill, small farms are the only suitable. And here you see some peculiarities. So normally, more or less, 3/4 of the hazelnut worldwide production is coming from small farms. Very low yield, we are talking about more or less 1 ton per hectare. In this case, we are talking about the overall hazelnut, so not only the edible part, but the hazelnut inside the shell. We have farm size who are growing from 1 to 10 hectares, normally are below the 5 hectares if we are taking into account the average. Labor, manual intensive work, and small machinery and low input. The geographies are Turkey, Azerbaijan, some region of Georgia, Campania, and Piedmont in Italy. Then we have a second cluster where we are going to something that is a little bit bigger, normally is between 10 and 30 hectares. The yields are increasing. Why this? Because you have a little bit more mechanization and you have also a little bit more inputs. And in this case, we have some region in Georgia, France, Lazio in Italy, and the central part of Chile. Last but not least, more or less 10% of the hazelnut today are coming from large size orchard. When we talk about large size, is above 30 hectares, where you have a highly mechanization value chain, high inputs, where you deal with professional farmers. For example, many of them have efficient irrigation system. Where you can find them in Oregon, for sure, in Serbia, and in north and south part of Chile. So the key challenges to address for hazelnut decarbonization are, I would say, mainly 3. I would say this is not exhaustive, but I think the 3 are the main ones. So for sure, we deal with a very fragmented landscape of suppliers. Again, 600,000 to produce a little bit more than 1.2 million of hazelnut means that the value chain is heavily fragmented. So to reach and to endorse farmers is always very difficult. Then there is a limited awareness on solution availables. So the technique is not easy to spread. Again, there is not a lot of official research. This is one of the critical points. But for sure, also when you deal with a fragmented value chain, to reach them with awareness training is always quite difficult. And then as I showed you before, the degree of variability is very big. So to deal with a farmer in Turkey, you need to have a certain approach, certain tools. To deal with a farmer in Chile or in US, you need to have a different tool. So to have a tool that is fulfilling all the gap is more or less impossible. So this is also quite a challenge. So to be able to fulfill all the different kind of value chain. So solutions. So only to share a little bit our overarching strategy, and then I would like to share a little bit into deep what we have developed for the hazelnut value chain. So in terms of responsible sourcing strategy, because this is the part of the Ferrero business where responsible sourcing is the one taking care of, our first approach is to deal with the suppliers on, I always say, a 4 cake layers approach. So we have a supplier risk management with a due diligence process who is based on the Ferrero supplier code. So the basic requirement of Ferrero are spread over the Ferrero supplier code. That is not only a piece of paper that is acknowledged by the suppliers, but we do audit via third party on the endorsement of the supplier code and on the application of the supplier code. Sorry, I was a little bit too fast. Sorry. Then we have the supply chain visibility, and I will show you later why it's so important. So traceability for us is a key building block to develop a sustainable value chain. On top of this, to have on the risk mitigation, always standard and the certification where they are available. When they are not available, we will develop our own. And where there is still a high risk, we have dedicated mitigation programs. Then for each single value chain where we have an important impact, and you can imagine that to be a confectionery company, there are a couple of important value chain, and I think Hazelnut for sure is one of the most important. We develop dedicated charters where we really set our ambition to have a value chain that is good not only for people, but for the planet and the people around. If we go a little bit deeper, the supplier code that is acknowledged by all our suppliers has an important part on the environmental pillar, where we have, and Mario touched some of the topic, no deforestation, carbon footprint, waste management, soil quality, animal welfare, sustainable packaging, energy efficiency, chemical management, water management, and biodiversity. So all this is translated into action into the value chain and is then checked via third-party audit. If we go a little bit deeper and we go back to the hazelnut, we developed our hazelnut charter already a couple of years ago. This is the second release. And in the hazelnut charter, this is a little bit our guidelines to produce sustainable hazelnut, good for people and good for the planet, divided in 3 main clusters, where we have the cluster number 1, who is mainly based on human rights and social practices, where our goal and our commitment is to further improve fair and safe working conditions, environmental protection sustainability, where we want to develop practical application and expansion of the principle of regenerative agriculture. And again, this is an important link to greenhouse gas emission moderation, and the supplier transparency, where we want to maintain and strengthen a level of traceability for all our sourcing farms. And the base of this is always a very strong due diligence process. So 3 case studies. So the first one is a little bit to explain what for us is very important, who is setting the scene. So understanding where our hazelnuts are coming from and how they are produced, because without setting the scene, it's impossible to build a proper strategy. The second case study is standard certification and knowledge sharing. So engage farmers via knowledge sharing and certification. And this is very important because hazelnut is a small value chain and there is no official certification standard available. So I will explain you later what we have done. And last but not least, there is always innovation, who is driving innovation to further reduce our carbon footprint. So we know that there is a gap to close, even if we look with a zoom on the orchard, we have seen before that 0.3 kgs of CO2 versus kg of final product is not a huge impact, but there is still something that we can do, even if the most important part is for sure to optimize logistics, as I show you in the first slide at the beginning of the presentation. So setting the scene, traceability. Again, when we started to talk about traceability 10 years ago, there was no technique to be and to support Ferrero to trace back the own hazelnut. We set a very important target a couple of years ago, who was to reach above 90% of traceable hazelnut back to farm gate. We asked the support to a third party credible in terms of service provider with source map, and we started with a couple of years of piloting before doing the official rollout. And we have been able in the last couple of years to be able to reach more than 93% of hazelnut trace back to farm gate. And again, this is very important because this is the first building block, because only when you are understanding where your hazelnut are coming from and how they are grown, you can start to build an action plan to optimize your greenhouse gas emission and to deliver also your social practices along the value chain. In a nutshell, we have more than 1,000 suppliers around the world. We are sourcing from 10 different countries, and today we have more than 65,000 farmers. So our market share in terms of farmers where we need to take into consideration is 65,000 versus the 600,000 farmers that are registered around the world growing hazelnuts. Then the second step was there was no official data available explaining the hazelnut value chain. So we worked closely with a third-party consultant to develop our own LCA, really to understand which are the hotspots. And again, also in this case, we have seen that there are quite a lot of differences between countries and countries, because you can imagine that to grow hazelnut in Chile or in US is different than to grow hazelnut in Turkey. This was the reason why we have developed different archetypes, and the data that I showed you before are the expression of this different archetype. So today we can say that in many countries we have an important carbon sequestration in above and below ground biomass. This is main in some European countries more than in the countries outside Europe. And land use change, conversion from annual crops to orchard, is bringing a negative carbon balance in many countries. The main emission contributors, as I mentioned before, for sure are the input, fertilizer, diesel, electricity, and all the emission linked to the transportation more than to the industrial conversion. So as you remember before, more than 70% of the emission are coming from logistics. Why this? Because 80% of the hazelnut are exported from the producing countries. So the other point, when we go to the second step, so the first one is setting the metrics. So understand the impact on one side and understanding where our hazelnut are coming from. Then on the case study, the second point was to use knowledge sharing and certification. So the problem of hazelnut, as you can imagine, is quite a small value chain. So there was no certification standard available when we started in 2012 to develop our first sustainable strategy. So the first step has to be the development of a Ferrero standard for sustainable hazelnut that is considering not only good social practices, but also good agricultural practices and supplier practices. And this has been developed with the following strategy. So we have the company guidelines, as I mentioned before, so the Ferrero Supplier Code, the Hazelnut Charter, so our vision for a sustainable hazelnut, the guidelines for sustainable hazelnut production, benchmark of existing standard of different sectors or different experience of Ferrero. We develop our standard and we deploy our standard, first of all, in Turkey. So our standard is developed, is rolled out, and to make it credible, we use a third-party verification once a year in dedicated countries with a dedicated audit, and we use the audit for developing a remediation plan. And again, it's very important because an important part of the standard is based on good agricultural practices who have, as you know, a big impact on the greenhouse gas emissions. These are some numbers. So today we have more than, this is the number of a couple months ago, but today I can say that we have a little bit more than 25,000 farmers who are certified under our standard in Turkey. who means we have more than 80,000 hectares of orchards, who is quite an important part of our value chain, already certified in Turkey. Plus, for us, it was also important to take care of our own orchards, our own farms around the world, Serbia, Georgia, Chile, and Argentina. So they have been certified SCS, so Sustainably Grown Standard, and they represent today roughly 5,000 hectares of orchards. So today we can say that with this double approach, we have more or less a little bit lower than 90,000 hectares who are certified not only for good agricultural practice, but also for good social practices around the world. And the main principle of our own certification as SGS global certification are soil conservation, so soil health, biodiversity protection, water management and conservation, plants protection and nutrition, and waste management. So the principles are the same. For sure, they are tailor-made in a different way, because when you deal with a big concession, big farm with 1,000 hectares, for sure, you have different instruments compared to the smallholders that we talked before about, the smallholders in Turkey, and not only in Turkey. Then, again, for the important part of knowledge sharing, we develop, with the support of our sustainability team and AUCN, guidelines for the sustainable hazelnut production. And why are these guidelines so important? Because they are including regenerative agriculture. So we are working closely with AUCN to have an instrument that, knowing that we cannot manage climate change, we can make a supply chain that can be resilient to climate change with good agricultural practices, regenerative agriculture. That's the reason why we developed these guidelines, and we have been able to spread it in 3 main regions, so Turkey, Italy, and Chile, reaching more than 21,000 farmers with specific training on regen agriculture. The knowledge guidelines are very simple, very linear, so easy to understand at all the level, and they are based on definitions. So these include the description of the topic that we want to address, what we recommend, because we always recommend, it's not a do or not do, is a recommendation, why we believe and this recommendation is suitable for the farmer to be followed. Again, it's always an open discussion, it's never something that is following by top. And food for thought, so some more discussion and explanation about the topic. Last but not least, innovation. So as I mentioned before, we have some farms around the world belonging to Ferrero. We are using them to not only producing hazelnut, but also to try to teach to hazelnut hectares good practices. So we are using our own farms plus some demo farms around the world to spread new practices and to test practices, new practices as well. And I want only to share one of these practices that is quite well known, even if it's not very applied at the moment, with pyrolysis to produce biochar. So you know that one of the big critical point is that hazelnut, and not only hazelnut, are producing a lot of biomass during the harvesting, during the cleaning phase, the pruning phase, and is better from the environmental point of view to produce biochar instead having a degradation that is putting in the air methane. So we are doing some piloting around the world in trying to see which is the scale, the value proposition of the biochar production in Chile as well in Italy. And we have seen that there are a couple of challenges. For sure, the main one is the capex, so there is really a very high cost involved. The need of building and reshape a little bit the supply chain, because you need to bring your biomass to a specific center then where it has to be processed into biochar. So it's not only to develop a supply chain to take your taking over of hazelnut, but in this case also of biomass. And at the moment, the biomass demand, the biochar demand is quite low. So we have done some trial, we bring back the biochar into the farms. We have seen that water erosion has been reduced quite heavily. Also the introduction of fertilizer. but the business model is not there yet. There is potential for sure, because great carbon sequestration, this is a fact. There is a lot of evidence on this. It's a perfect example of circular economy, and there are synergy with pruning management. But for sure, it's something that we want to test more before going to a wider spreading of this technology. So here some picture only about what we have done in Italy. This is already done in Italy, but we have done the same test in Chile, and we want to test it a couple of years to really understand if we are able to make it a little bit more economical, available for everyone. And this was it on my part, and I give the floor to you, Sharon.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Stefano and Mario. And for those of you who are here with us live, now is the opportunity to ask questions to Stefano and Mario if you're looking at this live or in the future, the recording. Thank you very much for joining today's session, and the slides will also be available for download on our website.